I sat in my therapist's office and said, if I had been a man, I would have wanted to be a pastor. I shared my Jesus story last week. It's a story of growing up in church and wanting to do things the right way and then beginning to find freedom. And next week, I'll share the story of how I wound up here at Sycamore Creek in South Lansing. But today, I want to share the story of my call. Now, for those of you who didn't grow up hearing words like call in this context, you might be wondering what a call story would entail. It is not about receiving a phone call. It's essentially a word that describes your purpose in life, and it often includes a sense that that purpose is God-given. And most pastors have a story of feeling like God is calling them to pastor, to lead, to preach, and to teach. And this is my story of that call. My name is Michal, and I've recently joined the staff here at Sycamore Creek. I'm falling in love with Lansing, and I'm so excited to be the next campus pastor of the South Lansing campus. I mentioned last week that I grew up in a church in a denomination called the Christian and Missionary Alliance. This denomination focuses heavily on overseas missions and working to bring the gospel to places where people have never heard it. As a young girl, their vision for sharing Jesus with the world captured my heart and my imagination. Every year we would host missionaries serving all over the world, and we'd hear their stories of how God had moved in and through them. We heard stories of the things that they had seen and the cultures they were immersed in. And when those men and women came and shared about how they were involved all over the world, my heart burned and my imagination flared. I wanted to be where they were. I wanted to be part of that work. Looking back with an adult's perspective, I have insight that I didn't have when I was young. I believe that God was beginning to stir in me a call to ministry. But this particular denomination had restrictions on what women could do. Women couldn't serve as elders, who are the decision makers of the church, and women couldn't be pastors who preach and lead. Women could share testimonies from their own lives on Sunday morning, and they could be missionaries. And I wanted to be a missionary because I saw women being missionaries. I began to test out this desire in high school and college. I went on short-term mission trips 4 times over those 8 years. And the 2 trips in high school were 8 weeks long each. And now as a parent, it's so hard to imagine sending my kid away for 8 weeks. And then the 2 trips in college were 4 weeks long each. I mentioned last week that I met my husband on one of those trips. And this week, I want to say that you should not go on a mission trip with the goal of finding a spouse. It's generally not a good idea. And it really takes missionary dating to a whole new level. Now, if you're laughing right now, I know that you grew up in conservative evangelicalism, and you maybe possibly wrestled with the moral dilemma of being a Christian who dates a non-Christian. Missionary dating was our solution. You could just date them to Jesus. But those trips, they did a few things for me. I got into the habit of a daily quiet time and began making my faith my own. I lived among people from other cultures who spoke different languages, and I began to experience cross-cultural immersion. I learned some cultural flexibility, and I began to practice seeing situations from multiple perspectives. I started wondering about whose perspective we needed to understand different situations. When I was in college at East Carolina University, I majored in history just because I really liked history. I expected to go to graduate school for something, but I had a hard time nailing down that next step. When I graduated, I immediately got married and applied for a distance counseling program at a Christian school. I was accepted, and then I started to count the cost of that program. Like the literal financial cost of a program like that seemed too great for us at the time. So I waited. I worked at our church in an administrative role while my husband went on staff with InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. It was the campus ministry we had both been part of while we were in college. And after his year-long internship, I was so excited when he was invited to go to East Carolina University to replant the chapter that had been closed after I graduated. I knew that planting and leading the chapter would primarily be his responsibility. It was his full-time job, but I was eager to be involved however I could. Soon after we moved there, I had our first son, and 19 months later, I had our second son. I worked in childcare for a while until right after our second son was born, when I started working as a baker at a restaurant. I shared last week about some of the challenges I faced in motherhood. But what I didn't mention was how in those years I was longing for a purpose outside the four walls of our apartment. I wanted to be part of something bigger than me. At the time, I wanted to be part of leading InterVarsity at ECU, and for a number of reasons that never really seemed to work out in a formal way. But I did get the chance to speak at their weekly gatherings and on some weekend retreats. I still didn't think that women should preach in a church, but I was okay with women leading in this way because I wasn't technically in the church. I loved teaching in that setting. And not only did I look for opportunities to do more of that, but also sometimes I resented Nathan for the opportunities that he was getting to teach or preach in various settings. Now, InterVarsity has been a leader among campus ministries for their work on racial reconciliation and justice. So from my time as a student and throughout Nathan's almost 10 years on staff, my heart expanded. Where as a child, I looked to the nations and wondered who hadn't heard the gospel and how I could be a part of it. I now looked to our own nation and my community to see who was being mistreated or excluded from places of leadership. I benefited greatly, not only from scholarship, but also from the relationships we built with staff. God was beginning to call me to the work of racial justice. I read a book by Helen Lee called The Missional Mom, where she explored some of the ways that women could be on mission with their children, ways that whole families could participate in mission together. I was excited to look beyond the four walls of our apartment for this purpose. As I shared this with Nathan, we began to discern a call to live cross-culturally. And so we moved into a lower income, predominantly non-white neighborhood in the fall of 2012.